Hello, everyone. Tonight, we begin with thunder. Not just any thunder, divine thunder hurled from Mount Olympus by a very dramatic, extremely unfaithful man named Zeus. Yes, welcome to Greek mythology, where the gods don't sit quietly on clouds blessing crops and singing lullabies. Instead, they throw tantrums, seduce mortals, start wars, and generally behave like over-caffeinated celebrities with reality TV contracts. Zeus, the king of the gods, was a walking HR nightmare. With a lightning bolt in one hand and a wandering eye in the other, he pursued mortals and goddesses alike, often transforming into bulls, swans, or even golden rain to get what he wanted. His wife, Hera, didn't take this lightly. She, too, was divine, but mostly in the category of revenge. If Zeus was the chaos, Hera was the consequences. But Zeus and Hera were just the start. Their siblings and children made Olympus feel like a cosmic soap opera. Poseidon, lord of the sea, could create earthquakes when moody. Hades ruled the underworld like a misunderstood goth cousin, kidnapping Persephone in what can only be described as the least romantic date in history. Ares, the god of war, loved fighting more than thinking. Athena, goddess of wisdom, was born fully armored out of Zeus's skull, which raises a lot of questions we'll save for therapy. And they all hated each other. Jealousy, rivalry, ego, it was all there. When you picture the Greek gods, think less holy beings and more immortal influencers who just discovered Instagram drama. Olympus wasn't heaven. It was high school with better robes and way more lightning. So why does this matter? Why does a pantheon of deeply flawed immortals from thousands of years ago still captivate us? Maybe because they reflect us. The Greeks didn't make their gods perfect. They made them personal. They made them loud, proud, angry, lustful, petty, and deeply human, except, they could turn into eagles and fling thunderstorms when annoyed. This was a revelation in ancient times. Other cultures had gods that were distant and unknowable, but the Greeks, they gave theirs tempers and appetites, and the kind of family drama that makes you feel better about your last Thanksgiving dinner. These gods weren't meant to be moral examples. They were cautionary tales, powerful metaphors, and sometimes just pure entertainment. They explained natural disasters through Poseidon's rage, or sudden deaths through Artemis's arrow. They taught lessons, but never gently. Consider poor Prometheus. He stole fire from the gods to give to humans, a noble act, and for this, Zeus chained him to a rock and had an eagle eat his liver every day, which grew back every day. The message: thanks for helping humanity. Enjoy eternal torture. Greek mythology didn't sugarcoat. It baked its lessons into a brutal pie and served them flaming. But it wasn't all suffering. There was beauty too. Aphrodite was born from sea foam and brought desire into the world. The Muses inspired creativity. Dionysus gave us wine and, presumably, the first hangover. These weren't just stories, they were celebrations of emotion, nature, creativity, and chaos. A mirror held up to the human soul that sometimes reflected back a goat-legged party boy with a flute. Another reason we love these gods: they explain why things are, not in a scientific way Newton was centuries off, but in a mythic one. The seasons, that's because Demeter misses her daughter Persephone, who spends half the year in the underworld. Echoes, that's a nymph cursed to repeat others. Spiders blame Arachne, who challenged Athena in a weaving contest and lost badly. Greek myths don't just tell us what happens, they tell us why it matters. And if you think it's all about dusty scrolls and old vases, think again. Greek mythology is everywhere. In books, movies, ads, brands, Nike, goddess of victory. The Olympics named for Olympus. Even Percy Jackson, a modern teenage demigod with ADHD and a sword, carries the torch of myth into high schools and streaming platforms. At their heart, these stories endure because they're timeless. Yes, they're messy, sometimes weird, often inappropriate, but they're packed with power that comes from seeing the divine in imperfection and understanding the world through stories instead of spreadsheets. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, know that above you, in the cloudy halls of Olympus, the gods are still squabbling, still flirting, still waging wars and granting favors. Not because they exist in reality, but because they live in our imagination in every story we tell about power, love, pride, fear, and fate. They are not dead. They are immortal not because of what they were, but because we still need them, as metaphors, as myths, and maybe, just maybe, as reminders that even gods have issues. You know how modern movies spend millions on visual effects to wow the audience? Well, the ancient Greeks had something even more powerful: imagination. Long before Hollywood, Netflix, or even electricity, Greek myths were the original blockbusters, stories so intense, so vivid, and so emotionally charged that they didn't need CGI. Just words, and fire, and maybe a guy yelling the tale in a smoky amphitheater while wearing a tragic mask. Imagine sitting under a starlit sky in an open-air theater, the sea breeze in your hair, and a booming voice echoing through the night: sing, muse of the wrath of Achilles, and you're hooked. These weren't quiet parables. These were epic. They had war, betrayal, monsters, romance, betrayal again, and just enough divine intervention to ruin everyone's plans. Take the Iliad. It starts in the middle of a war already 10 years deep. Why? Because of a wedding that Zeus really should have RSVP'd no to. Paris, a prince from Troy, is bribed by 3 goddesses with promises of power, wisdom, and the most beautiful woman in the world. He chooses the beauty Helen, and bam, she's taken from Sparta, sparking a massive war that claims thousands of lives and includes a guy sulking in his tent because someone took his war prize. Yes, Achilles pouted while people died. Or the Odyssey. It's basically one long road trip from hell. Odysseus just wants to go home after war. But the gods aren't done playing dice with his fate. He faces cannibal giants, enchanting witches, sea monsters, and a man-eating whirlpool named Charybdis. Oh, and let's not forget the island of the Lotus Eaters, where his men get high and forget why they were there. Every obstacle is mythic, but it feels weirdly familiar, like the worst layover in human history. These myths didn't just entertain. They united people. In a world without national identity or Netflix subscriptions, myths were the shared language of awe. When someone said Hercules, you didn't ask who, you asked 12 labors or the one with the Hydra, because everyone knew him. He was a household name long before he became a Disney character with a gospel choir. Greek myths also made the stakes bigger than personal. They made them cosmic. This wasn't just one king versus another. This was fate versus free will, hubris versus humility, man versus God. And it was loud. When Oedipus fulfilled a terrible prophecy by accident, it wasn't just a twist ending. It was a thunderclap about how hard it is to escape destiny, even when you try really, really hard to do the right thing. And it's not just the Greeks who got swept up in this cinematic universe. Roman writers loved these myths so much they rebranded them. Zeus became Jupiter. Aphrodite became Venus. It was like the first franchise reboot. Then Renaissance painters splashed the stories across ceilings and canvases, and later scholars turned them into textbooks. In every era, someone pressed play on these ancient dramas. Let's talk special effects. Greek myths had plenty. Want to fly? Try Icarus and Daedalus, escaping a labyrinth with wings made of feathers and wax. Just don't fly too close to the sun. Want monsters? The Chimera breathed fire. The Minotaur lived in a literal maze. Medusa turned people to stone with her gaze. If you think your boss is terrifying, imagine asking for a raise while staring at a gorgon. And every myth had that moment, that heart-racing, breath-holding, seat-gripping scene where it could all fall apart. When Theseus forgets to change his sail from black to white and his father throws himself into the sea. When Persephone bites into the pomegranate, sealing her fate. When Orpheus looks back, just once. Even better, these blockbusters came with moral depth. They weren't just action and eye candy. They asked big questions. Can you escape fate? Should mortals defy the gods? Is love stronger than death? Why does hubris, pride taken too far, always end in disaster? In many ways, the myths were the first mirrors humans held up to their own souls, dramatizing every flaw and dream. The violence wasn't just spectacle, it was consequence. The beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was sacred and dangerous. Every moment had weight. Every decision had echo. Even the silence between battles spoke volumes. Today, we still chase those feelings. Every time we sit in a theater or binge a series, hoping to be transported, we're reaching for what the Greeks already perfected: the emotional roller coaster, the impossible odds, the flawed hero, and the tiny spark of hope. Even modern superheroes, Thor, Wonder Woman, even Thanos, are just mythological echoes in a new costume. So, as your eyes grow heavy tonight, know this: those ancient tales weren't just entertainment. They were survival. They helped humans understand the world, endure loss, process grief, and even laugh at fate. They gave people the gift of escape into a world where anything could happen, where heroes rise and gods fall. Not bad for stories told by firelight. You don't love a hero because they're perfect. You love them because they try, fail, bleed, sulk, cry, stand back up, and try again, even if they're covered in monster guts and ancient curses. That's the secret sauce of Greek mythology. These aren't flawless champions, they're messes with muscles. And that's exactly why they've endured. Take Achilles. In the Iliad, he's strong, fast, nearly invincible, and a raging egomaniac. When his pride is wounded, he storms off and refuses to fight, even as his comrades fall one by one. Then his closest friend dies, and suddenly his rage shifts from petty to legendary. He re-enters battle, kills Hector in single combat, and then drags his body around Troy like a gruesome victory lap. Is he a good guy? No. Is he compelling? Absolutely. Or look at Heracles' Hercules. If you're Roman, he kills his wife and children in a fit of madness, thanks Hera, and spends the rest of his life performing impossible labors to atone. Clean the Augean stables, check. Slay the Hydra, bring it. Steal the golden apples, why not? He's tragic, brutal, sometimes deeply unwise. But you root for him anyway, because beneath the lion skin and club is a man haunted by what he's done. Then there's Odysseus. Oh, Odysseus. He's clever, slippery, brave, and exhausting. He spends 10 years trying to get home, outwits monsters and gods, and still manages to make life harder for himself at every turn. He lies constantly. He cheats death with tricks and speeches. He even brags so hard to a Cyclops that Poseidon curses him for the rest of the trip. But when he finally gets home and strings his old bow to defeat the suitors, you cheer, because you've watched him crawl through hell and back. He's flawed. He's human. He's yours. Greek myths didn't invent the anti-hero, but they sure made them iconic. These stories weren't about teaching you how to be perfect. They were about surviving your imperfections. They told you that even if you've made terrible choices, even if the gods are against you, even if the monsters are real, you can still fight, still change, still matter. Even tragic figures like Oedipus carry this weight. He tries to avoid a terrible prophecy that he'll kill his father and marry his mother, so he runs from home. Ironically, the man he kills on the road is his father. The woman he marries is his mother. He doesn't know until it's too late. When he finds out, he blinds himself in horror. That's a bit extreme. But the tragedy isn't that he's evil. It's that he tried so hard not to be. It's about fate. Yes, but also about how hard it is to know the full truth of your own life. And then we have the women. Oh yes, they're flawed heroes too. Medea helps Jason get the golden fleece, betrays her own family, and is later betrayed by Jason himself. Her revenge is infamous, but her pain devastating. She's not someone you'd invite to dinner, but you'd think twice before judging her story. Or Atalanta, raised by bears, faster than most men, sworn to remain unmarried unless someone could outrun her in a race. Many tried, they failed. She was a hero, a hunter, a rebel, and every bit as heroic as her male counterparts, if not more. Her flaws: pride, stubbornness, maybe a little recklessness, just like the rest of them. What makes these stories shine is how relatable they are under all the mythic glitter. Haven't we all felt pride that got in the way, made decisions that spiraled out of control, wanted something so badly that we ignored every red flag on the path toward it? The Greeks didn't just tell stories, they held up a mirror and said, "This is you," just with more snakes and spears. Even the gods weren't above this. Zeus couldn't control his desires. Hera couldn't let go of a grudge. Athena could be brilliant and cruel. Ares was a musclehead with daddy issues. They weren't above humanity, they were humanity, just bigger, louder, and immortal. That's why these flawed heroes continue to captivate. Because perfection is boring. It doesn't teach you anything. But failure, tragedy, regret, those are universal. And when wrapped in myth, they become powerful tools not just to entertain, but to heal, to understand, to warn, and sometimes to laugh. Yes, laugh. Greek myths weren't all doom and gloom. There were plenty of absurd moments, like when Hephaestus catches Aphrodite cheating and traps her and Ares in a golden net. Then he invites all the other gods to come look. Who does that? Or when Hermes steals Apollo's cattle as a baby and tries to pretend he's innocent by walking backward in sandals. Ancient sitcom energy. Flawed heroes let us laugh and cry. They invite us into their struggles, their triumphs, and their messes. They tell us it's okay to be broken, so long as you keep going. Keep learning. Keep telling your story. So as you drift off tonight, think about your own imperfections, the things you've overcome, the monsters you've faced, external and internal. You're not Achilles, you're not Medusa, but your story, it's just as mythic, and it's still being written. You're standing in the dark, you hear hissing, something slithers in the shadows. Then bam, out leaps a creature with 3 heads, 12 claws, the wings of a bat, and a name you're not even sure how to pronounce. Welcome to Greek mythology's most charming feature, the monsters. But here's the thing. These weren't just freaky creatures dreamt up to scare children or fill in time between tragic speeches. Greek monsters had meaning. They symbolized chaos, taboo, fear of the unknown, and the fine line between nature and civilization. They were nightmares with names, and each one carried a warning, a story, or a question humans hadn't yet answered. Take Medusa. Everyone remembers her hair full of snakes and the unfortunate habit of turning people to stone with a glance. But look closer, her story is about beauty turned into terror, about rage and violation. Once a mortal woman, Medusa was punished by Athena after being assaulted by Poseidon in the goddess's temple. Not exactly a fair outcome. She's monstrous. Yes, but she's also a tragic symbol of vengeance and lost innocence. Then there's the Hydra, a many-headed serpent that grows 2 heads for every one you cut off. You can't tell me that's not a metaphor for life's worst problems. Cut off 1 bill, 2 more show up. It took Heracles, a sword, and some flaming torches just to slow it down. The lesson: some monsters aren't defeated with brute strength. You need strategy, patience, and maybe a friend with fire. The Minotaur, half man, half bull, locked in a labyrinth so confusing even Google Maps would give up. He's more than a beast, he's the shameful secret of a royal family, born of deceit and punishment. To keep him hidden, King Minos commissions the world's first architectural nightmare, a maze with no exit. Every year, young Athenians are sacrificed to it until Theseus, armed with courage and a ball of string, defeats the beast and escapes. The Minotaur isn't just a scary face, it's the embodiment of secrets, guilt, and the horrors we try to bury, literally, under a palace. Let's not forget the Chimera. She's got the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent, and she breathes fire. Why? Because sometimes life doesn't make sense, and you still have to fight it anyway. Bellerophon defeats her with clever thinking, not brute force, proving that even the weirdest problems can be solved if you stay calm and keep your Pegasus steady. Greek monsters weren't faceless evils. They were strange, yes, but always unique, and always rooted in something deeper. The sirens sang sailors to their deaths, not just because they were dangerous, but because they embodied temptation, especially the kind that sounds beautiful but leads to ruin. Odysseus had to be tied to his mast just to survive them, reminding us all that sometimes resisting temptation isn't about willpower, it's about planning ahead. Scylla and Charybdis, 2 monsters on either side of a narrow sea passage. One snatches sailors with her 6 gnashing heads. The other is a whirlpool that will suck your ship into the depths. Odysseus had to choose between the 2, sacrificing a few to save the many. That's not just a sea monster problem. That's a leadership metaphor, a daily life metaphor, a do I pay rent or buy groceries metaphor. And then there are the gentle monsters, the ones you pity more than fear. Like Polyphemus the Cyclops, who's less terrifying brute and more lonely outcast with a sheep obsession. Or the Sphinx, who asks a riddle that, if answered incorrectly, results in your doom. But if answered correctly, she destroys herself. The riddle: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening isn't just a trick question. It's a metaphor for human life. Crawl as a baby, walk as an adult, lean on a cane in old age. The Sphinx isn't just testing knowledge. She's testing understanding of what it means to be human. Monsters in Greek myth were not just defeated, they were interpreted. And that's the secret to their staying power. You can read them as literal enemies, or as fears made flesh. What are you really fighting when you fight the Hydra? A tough opponent or your own anxiety that keeps multiplying? What is the labyrinth, if not your own confusion and fear of getting lost? And what are the gods, if not the originators of monsters themselves? Many of these creatures are divine punishments or accidents. Medusa cursed, the Minotaur, the result of defying the gods. Python sent by Gaia. It's like every monster has a family tree, and guess what? It's full of divine dysfunction. Even today, we love monsters. We just changed the format. Zombies, aliens, vampires, robots gone rogue. We're still using creatures to explore what we're scared of. Death, technology, the future, ourselves. Greek mythology just got there first. So as you close your eyes tonight, think of the monsters you've faced, real or imagined. Maybe they're in your inbox. Maybe they're memories. Maybe they're fears you haven't named yet. But know this, you're not alone. Every hero in myth faced a beast that seemed impossible. And they survived, sometimes with scars, sometimes with clever tricks, but always with a story. And if Greek myths have taught us anything, it's that the monsters are real, but so is the hero. And spoiler, the hero is you. Imagine, for a moment, that Mount Olympus had a streaming service. You open it, and what do you see? Not peaceful harp music or meditative yoga tutorials. No, this is peak drama. Gods throwing shade, affairs with mortals, explosions, petty revenge, basically keeping up with the Olympians. Because if there's one thing Greek mythology nailed, it's divine drama. These weren't your typical silent, omnipotent gods. No serene smiles or mysterious plans here. The Olympians were emotional, unpredictable, and frequently petty, and that's what makes them so entertaining. Let's start with Zeus, the king of the gods, and probably the most canceled deity in ancient history. He had more affairs than there were city-states in Greece. He transformed into animals, disguised himself as husbands, even descended from the sky as a literal shower of gold just to seduce mortals. And Hera, his long-suffering wife, she wasn't having it. But here's the twist: Hera didn't usually take it out on Zeus. Oh no, she took it out on the women he seduced and their children. Ever heard of Heracles' strong guy? Lion skin, hero of many labors. Yeah, Hera made his life a living nightmare. Why? Because he was Zeus's son. She sent snakes to kill him as a baby. When that didn't work, she drove him mad and caused him to murder his own family. That's not mythology. That's a crime series. Then there's Apollo and Artemis twins. Sure, but wildly different vibes. Apollo was the golden boy, god of the sun, music, poetry, and plague. Yes, he gave people the flu and poetry slams. He was also kind of a jerk when rejected. Poor Daphne had to turn into a tree to escape his advances. Meanwhile, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, swore off men completely. When Actaeon accidentally saw her bathing, she turned him into a deer and let his own hunting dogs tear him apart. Talk about overkill. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, was married to Hephaestus, the god of blacksmithing, lava, and general unsexiness. But her heart belonged to Ares, the god of war. Together, they were the original toxic couple, hot, passionate, and full of betrayal. Hephaestus, in a moment of pure petty genius, built a golden net to catch them mid-affair and invited all the gods to witness the humiliation. Ancient group chat energy, new event gods watch cheaters get exposed. And don't even get me started on Athena and Poseidon. One was the goddess of wisdom, born from Zeus's forehead with a full set of armor and a no-nonsense attitude. The other, a moody sea god with serious competition issues. When both wanted to be the patron of Athens, they had a divine talent show. Poseidon created a saltwater spring. Athena, she invented the olive tree. The people picked her. He sulked about it for centuries. Still might be sulking, if we're honest. The gods didn't just fight among themselves. They manipulated mortals like pawns in a cosmic game of chess. During the Trojan War, gods picked sides, cheated, lied, and occasionally just dropped in for a casual smite. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite even had a beauty contest judged by a mortal, Paris. That went well if you define well as triggered a decade-long war that left Troy in flames. What's fascinating is how personal it all feels. These gods weren't abstract. They were deeply emotional. Proud, jealous, vindictive. Kind of like that one friend group that always goes on vacation and ends up blocking each other by day 3. Olympus wasn't just a divine realm, it was a pressure cooker of egos. But here's the genius of it all, that chaos made the gods relatable. You didn't have to understand divine mysteries. You just had to understand family drama, sibling rivalry, romantic betrayal, That one cousin who always ruins holidays. The Greeks gave their gods flaws not by accident, but by design. Because a god you fear is distant, a god you laugh at, cry with, and maybe roll your eyes at that god lives in your world. This mythic drama also served a practical purpose. It explained real-world chaos. Why was the sea stormy Poseidon's mad again? Why did crops fail Demeter's grieving? Why are men such disasters? Probably something Ares did. It was theology as gossip column, sacred dysfunction. And the best part, the gods never really learned. They just kept going. Mistakes weren't rare, they were the norm. And in that, they mirrored humanity perfectly. The message wasn't, be like the gods. It was, even gods are a mess. So you're doing fine. Today, we still adore this kind of storytelling. Reality shows, soap operas, drama-filled prestige TV. All of it has roots in the juicy tales told around Greek fire pits. We love watching powerful people behave badly. It's cathartic, it's thrilling, it's oddly reassuring. So as your head sinks deeper into your pillow tonight, imagine Mount Olympus not as a sacred temple, but as a glitzy, divine penthouse full of drama queens. Lightning bolts as text messages, prophecies as scandal leaks, thunderstorms as passive-aggressive tweets. And in the center of it all, a bunch of immortal beings desperately trying to outdo each other in the great celestial mess. Honestly, it makes heaven seem a little less distant and a lot more fun. Let's be honest, some nights, you don't want a happy ending. You want drama. You want heartbreak. You want someone shouting no into the wind as a ship sails away, probably on fire. That's tragedy, and the Greeks were absolute masters at it. It wasn't just about people dying. It was about why they died, about the choices they made, the fate they couldn't avoid, the gods they accidentally insulted, the moment they stepped 1 inch too far into arrogance and the universe punished them, dramatically and without mercy. The Greeks understood something modern culture sometimes forgets. Sadness isn't the opposite of beauty. It is beauty, sharpened to a point. It's the reason we still cry during movies we've seen 20 times. Why we keep retelling the same doomed love stories. Why we remember tragedies long after we forget who won the battle. Take Antigone. She's a teenage girl who just wants to bury her brother. That's it. But the king Creon says it's illegal. She defies him, stands alone, and pays the ultimate price. No armies, no monsters, no gods. Just one girl versus the state. It's quiet, powerful, and utterly devastating. And the worst part, she's right, and still loses. Or Orestes, who avenges his father's murder by killing his mother because the gods told him to. And then he's cursed with madness and guilt, because the gods also told him not to. It's the kind of emotional whiplash only ancient Greece could pull off. Fate was the ultimate puppet master, and humans were tangled in its strings. Tragedy wasn't just a genre, it was a worldview. The Greeks believed in Moira fate, destiny, the inescapable path written before you were born. Step too far outside your role, boom. Divine punishment. Even kings couldn't escape it, especially kings. Just ask Oedipus, who tried so hard to dodge his prophecy that he ran straight into it, blindfolded and shouting, "I'm doing great." But here's the twist: Greek tragedies aren't just about destruction. They're about awareness. About the moment the hero realizes what they've done. That gut punch of recognition, the Greek called it anagnorisis, is what makes the stories unforgettable. It's when the prince realizes he's been dancing with his enemy. When the queen understands she married her son. When the hero sees the ship burning and knows it's his fault. It's not subtle, but it is powerful. And then there's the chorus. Ah, The Greek chorus, part narrator, part moral compass, part we told you so. They chant warnings, mourn losses. Sometimes they literally just scream. And honestly, sometimes that's what you need. A group of people shouting, "This was a bad idea," while the hero blunders forward anyway. Why do we still love these tragedies? Because they touch something deep and eternal in us. The knowledge that life is fragile, that choices matter, that sometimes doing the right thing still hurts, that grief is real and heavy and doesn't always come with a silver lining. In a world full of curated perfection, Greek tragedy says, feel everything, even the hard stuff, especially the hard stuff. It gives space for pain, not to fix it, but to honor it. And oddly enough, that makes us feel better. Think about Eurydice and Orpheus. He goes to the underworld to save her, plays music so beautiful it makes Hades weep. He's told, walk ahead of her, but don't look back. Of course, he looks back. One glance and she's gone forever. You scream at him through the story, just wait 2 more seconds, but he doesn't. Because he's human, and humans make heartbreaking mistakes. Or consider Iphigenia, sacrificed by her own father so the Greek fleet can sail to Troy. She dies, nobly and horribly, because of politics and prophecy. Her name echoes through the rest of the war, never forgotten, never justified. She's not a footnote. She's a wound in the story. Greek tragedy doesn't offer easy answers. There are no villains twirling mustaches, just flawed people, impossible decisions, and gods who sometimes flip a coin for fun. It's not fair. It's not just, but it's true in the way that myths are always emotionally true, even when they're logically absurd. And maybe that's the real secret. Tragedy lets us process the unfairness of life in a way we can bear. It turns chaos into story, pain into poetry, loss into legacy. Even today, we echo these myths. Hamlet is just Orestes with better branding. Romeo and Juliet are doomed lovers straight out of Euripides' playbook. Every prestige drama with a morally gray protagonist owes something to ancient Greece. So as you lie there, staring at the ceiling, maybe mourning something you can't quite name, let the tragedies keep you company. Let Antigone whisper that you're brave to speak out. Let Orpheus remind you that love makes fools of us all. Let the chorus sing softly in your mind, not of despair, but of understanding. Because Greek tragedy was never about giving up. It was always about facing it. If you ever think your love life is complicated, remember this: Zeus once turned into a swan to seduce a woman. Another time, a bull. And at least once, literal golden mist. The ancient Greeks didn't just write love stories, they wrote cosmic, chaotic, consequence-heavy cautionary tales that began with a flirt and ended with someone getting turned into a tree. Greek mythology is drenched in passion, not the sweet, candlelit kind. No, this is wild, irrational, gods throwing thunderbolts passion. It's lusty, messy, and full of very bad decisions, and that's exactly why we keep coming back to it. Take the story of Paris and Helen, a mortal prince, a goddess-sponsored beauty contest, and a woman whose face launched 1,000 ships. Paris wins Helen's heart, or maybe just kidnaps her, depending on who's telling the story, and drags her back to Troy. The result: 10 years of war, thousands of deaths, and a flaming wooden horse full of guys with swords. All because of one affair. Modern dating scandals seem tame by comparison. Then there's Narcissus, a man so beautiful, so mesmerizing, that he fell in love with his own reflection. He stared into the water until he wasted away proof that excessive self-love might not be the best relationship strategy. Meanwhile, poor Echo, the nymph who adored him, was cursed to only repeat the last words spoken to her. Not a great start to any conversation. Together, they form one of the saddest one-sided romances in history, one obsessed with himself, the other unable to speak her mind. Greek myth. Ladies and gentlemen, and who could forget Pygmalion, a sculptor who carved his ideal woman out of ivory, then fell in love with her? Aphrodite, possibly amused or slightly creeped out, brings the statue to life. It's a tale of devotion, creativity, and maybe a little too much time spent alone in a workshop. But love in Greek myth wasn't always tender. Often, it was dangerous. Medea helped Jason steal the golden fleece, betrayed her family, and fled with him across the sea. She bore his children. Then he left her for a younger princess. Medea didn't write a breakup poem, she burned the entire relationship to the ground. Literally. She poisoned the bride, set the palace ablaze, and, well, let's just say the kids didn't survive either. She wasn't a villain. She was a storm, and you felt her fury. Even the gods didn't fare well in love. Aphrodite, goddess of desire, was married to Hephaestus but longed for Ares. Their affair led to a scandalous divine photo shoot, courtesy of a golden net. Meanwhile, Hephaestus just wanted someone to look past the limp and love the craftsman. It's all painfully relatable except for the part with the magical trap. Love in these stories wasn't about happily ever after. It was about why we fall, how we fall, and what it costs us when we do. Psyche had to complete impossible tasks to win back Eros, including descending into the underworld. That's not texting back. That's an epic journey of trust, loss, and transformation. There were also the quiet heartbreaks. Orpheus and Eurydice, she dies. He sings so beautifully that Hades allows her to return, but only if he walks out without looking back. You know how this ends. He looks, she vanishes. It's love sabotaged by fear, by doubt, by one split second of human weakness. You don't scream at the gods. You scream at him. Because you know that kind of mistake. You've made it too. The Greeks weren't writing romance. They were writing revelation. Love is a force that reshapes you, that exposes your weaknesses, that shows you exactly who you are, sometimes through joy, more often through pain. These stories weren't meant to make you feel safe. They were meant to make you feel, period. And for all their tragedy, these myths also celebrated connection. Persephone and Hades, initially a kidnapping, yes, but over time reinterpreted as a dark, cyclical love story. Their union explained the seasons. 6 months in the underworld, 6 months in the sunlight. It's eerie, it's haunting, and it's beautiful, in a melancholic way. Why do we keep telling these stories? Because love hasn't changed. We still make foolish choices. We still long for someone who doesn't look back. We still wish our flaws could be sculpted into something beautiful. And when we hear these ancient tales, we recognize ourselves not in the gods or the monsters, but in the feelings. You felt what Medea felt. Maybe not to her degree, hopefully, but the betrayal, the white-hot sting of being replaced. You've known Orpheus's hesitation, Echo's silence, Psyche's desperation to prove herself worthy. Even today, our art echoes these themes. Romantic comedies, tragic dramas, songs on the radio, they're all the descendants of Greek myths. The stakes may be different, but the feelings are exactly the same. Love that burns too fast, love that arrives too late, love that survives impossible odds. So tonight, if your heart feels heavy, or if you're thinking about someone you lost or someone you never quite had, let these myths sit beside you. They won't fix anything, but they'll remind you that even gods made fools of themselves for love. That longing is timeless. That heartbreak, as much as joy, makes us human. And sometimes, the worst decisions make the best stories. Imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient temple. The stone columns are cracked, the roof long gone, but something still pulses in the silence. It's not just history, it's myth, carved into every surface. Because the Greeks didn't just tell their stories. They built them. They sculpted them. They painted them across walls, urns, shields, and ceilings. They immortalized myth in stone. And these weren't gentle, whispering tributes. No. Greek art shouted. It told stories of betrayal and bravery with muscle-bound heroes frozen mid-swing, of grieving goddesses with tear-streaked faces chipped into marble. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. It was powerful, personal and permanent. The Parthenon, that wasn't just a temple to Athena. It was a canvas. Its friezes showed gods battling giants, men fighting centaurs, the triumph of order over chaos. If you didn't know the stories, you could see them. Every sculpture was a sentence, every pillar, a paragraph. Pottery was its own kind of myth delivery system. Black figure and red figure vases weren't just for wine, they were storybooks. One cup might show Heracles wrestling the Nemean lion, another Ajax dragging Achilles from battle. These were everyday objects, but they carried epics. Pour yourself a drink, and suddenly you're staring at a god mid-transformation. Even coins bore the faces of legends. Athena's owl, Apollo's lyre, Pegasus, winged and defiant. The myths were everywhere, not locked in books, but alive in the market, the home, the battlefield. If you could see, you could read them. Statues. Oh, they didn't hold back. The Greeks knew how to turn cold marble into something burning. The Discobolus, that discus thrower caught mid-spin, muscles rippling like water. Laocoon and his sons, tangled in sea serpents, their faces twisted in terror. Even when depicting pain, Greek sculptors made it beautiful and unforgettable. But why go to all this trouble? Why carve Achilles into the side of a temple? Why shape Medusa's face into a shield? Because they believed stories weren't just for telling, they were for remembering. And memory is a tricky thing. Words can fade, but stone endures. There was also something magical, maybe even divine, about turning myth into matter. When you sculpted a god, you weren't just honoring them, you were inviting them, giving them a place in your world, a shape, a presence, a body. In this way, art wasn't just decoration. It was a form of worship, of storytelling, and maybe of warning. See, not every image was heroic. Sometimes, Greek art challenged its viewers. Like the statue of Prometheus, chained to a rock, a grim eagle pecking at his liver for all eternity. Look at that too long, and you might start questioning your own ambition. Or Icarus, plummeting from the sky, wings melted. The sculpture doesn't just show his fall, it feels it. The limp limbs, the twist of the spine. It's a myth in motion. These visual myths also served as a kind of education. Literacy wasn't widespread in ancient Greece, but everyone could see. Children learned about courage, treachery, lust, and loyalty not from textbooks but from temples and pottery. Art was the original classroom, and mythology was the curriculum. What's even more amazing, we still know these stories, thousands of years later, because the Greeks made them visible. In a way, their myths have outlived the cities that birthed them. Troy may be rubble, but Helen's face is still here. Delphi is dust, but Apollo's gaze remains. And this didn't end with the Greeks. The Romans picked up the chisel. The Renaissance worshipped the form. Modern museums hold on to the fragments, displaying them like sacred relics because that's what they are. Pieces of belief, shards of story, ghosts in marble. And these ghosts still whisper. You don't need to know who that muscular guy with the lion skin is to feel something when you see him. That's Heracles. Strength, suffering, a lifetime of impossible tasks, right there in one pose. You don't need to understand the full myth of Niobe to ache when you see her stone children dying around her, their mouths open in a scream no longer heard. Greek artists weren't just craftsmen. They were myth makers in 3 dimensions. And what they made wasn't just for display, it was meant to speak, to whisper warnings, to show consequences, to celebrate the best in us and reveal the worst. Today, we still do it. We sculpt, we paint, we film, we design. Our superheroes stand on pedestals in Times Square. Our myths beam from screens in bright colors and epic soundtracks. But the idea is the same. Take a story, give it form, and let it live. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine walking through a marble hall filled with frozen myths, heroes and monsters, gods and mortals, all holding still, all speaking. If you listen, their stories aren't over. Because as long as someone sees them, remembers them, feels them, they're still alive. They're not just carved in stone. They're carved into us. Close your eyes and picture a classroom. Not a modern one with flickering fluorescent lights, math problems on whiteboards, and the faint hum of a struggling air conditioner. No, this classroom has no desks, no textbooks, no bells, just a circle of people sitting by firelight, wide-eyed as someone older, wiser, and slightly dramatic tells a story. Greek mythology was the original school, and the best part, you never felt like you were being taught. You were just listening to a thrilling story about gods, monsters, and heroes, and somehow, you walked away understanding life just a little bit better. Let's start with Icarus. You know the story. A boy and his father escape a labyrinth with wings made of feathers and wax. The only rule, don't fly too close to the sun. But Icarus gets cocky, flies higher. And well, wax and solar heat don't mix. Down he goes. Splash. The lesson: ambition is good. Arrogance gets you melted and drowned. But the Greeks didn't lecture you on humility, they showed it. Through flight, freedom, and failure. Prometheus is another brilliant example. He steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans, basically handing us technology, warmth, and civilization. What does he get for this act of generosity? Chained to a rock and pecked at by an eagle forever. Lesson: progress has a price. Also, maybe don't tick off Zeus. But again, no sermon, just fire, pain, and a trickster with good intentions. And Arachne, she was just a weaver, brilliant, bold, and maybe a bit too full of herself. She challenged Athena to a weaving contest, and won, which would have been great if she hadn't used her tapestry to mock the gods. Athena, not known for taking jokes well, turned her into a spider. So yes, that cobweb in your room is basically an ancient moral reminder: talent is beautiful, but hubris is sticky. This is how Greek myths worked. They slipped lessons into your heart without needing a chalkboard. They made consequences visual. They gave feelings a face. It's one thing to say, don't be prideful. It's another to tell the story of Niobe, who bragged that she had more children than the goddess Leto, only to watch those children get struck down, one by one, as punishment. You don't forget that story, ever. Greek mythology also taught balance. There was always a line you shouldn't cross. The Greeks called it hubris, excessive pride. Not confidence, not strength, but the belief that you could challenge the gods. fate, or nature itself, and walk away clean. Almost no one in these myths gets away with hubris. It's like a cosmic law written in lightning bolts. But there was another side to it, a softer side. Myths also taught you about endurance, about cleverness. Odysseus doesn't survive by being the strongest. He survives by being clever, by outwitting monsters, by lying, yes, often, but also thinking 2 steps ahead. You learn that brains beat brawn, that persistence matters, that sometimes survival is the greatest triumph of all. They even taught social rules. The idea of xenia, or hospitality, was sacred. Welcome your guest, feed them, ask questions later. Why? Because the gods often disguise themselves as travelers. If you were rude, you might offend Zeus. There are stories, so many stories of kings and peasants who offered kindness to strangers and were rewarded, and just as many who slammed the door and got divine retribution. It's the ancient version of don't be a jerk, because karma has excellent aim. And Greek mythology wasn't just for children. Adults learned from it, too, about love, grief, revenge, justice, power. Orestes avenges his father by killing his mother. But was it justice or another crime? The story forces you to think about law, family, and what happens when vengeance becomes a cycle. Heavy stuff, but wrapped in legend. Easy to digest, hard to forget. That's the secret of myths. They simplify the complicated. They dress up hard truths in wild stories and let you figure them out at your own pace. It's storytelling as slow burn wisdom. You might not get the message the first time, or the 5th, but eventually, it hits. And that's what makes it so effective. Because it doesn't lecture you. It doesn't demand agreement. It just exists shimmering at the edges of memory, ready to make sense when you're ready to hear it. Even now, we do the same thing. We tell stories to kids with animals that talk, teaching empathy, patience, teamwork. Adults binge shows that explore morality, justice, identity, still learning through fiction. Mythology isn't outdated. It's just wearing new clothes. So tonight, as you drift off, think of all the stories that shaped you, that warned you, that comforted you. Think of the myths, ancient and modern, that held a mirror up to your life and said, look, this is how it can go. Maybe you didn't notice it at the time. Maybe you thought it was just entertainment. But deep down, you knew. Greek mythology never wanted to preach. It just wanted to prepare you. And it still does. Let's say someone told you, hey, I've got this amazing story. It's got betrayal, revenge, a war that lasts 10 years, meddling gods, love triangles, and a really big wooden horse. You'd say, oh, is it a new Netflix series? Nope, that's the Iliad, baby. Nearly 3,000 years old and somehow still binge-worthy. Greek mythology doesn't age, it evolves. That's part of its magic. Every generation rediscovers it, rewrites it, remixes it. These aren't just old stories stuck in dusty scrolls. They're living myths, shape-shifting through time. And each version says something new about the people telling it. Take the Renaissance. While the rest of the world was working on staying alive during the Middle Ages, Italy said, you know what we need? Naked gods in marble. Artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli brought the myths back in a big way. Venus rising from the sea, Hercules striking a pose. They didn't just depict myths, they made them fashionable again, wrapped in silk and gold leaf. Then the Romantics arrived. Poets like Keats and Shelley took Greek myths and turned them into heartbreak ballads. They didn't care much for historical accuracy, they cared about feeling, about longing, death, nature, and beauty. Myth was no longer just a story. It was emotion in disguise. Fast forward to today, and the myths are everywhere. Percy Jackson turned gods into dysfunctional parents and demigods into sarcastic teenagers. Disney gave us a singing Hercules. Marvel dropped Thor into Brooklyn. Even video games let you punch Hades in the face or flirt with Aphrodite, depending on your dialogue choices. And it works because at the core, the stories are still so good. You don't need to know what a chitin is to enjoy a story about a hero outsmarting a monster. You don't have to memorize all 12 labors to feel inspired by Heracles' struggle. You just need a heart and maybe a good Wi-Fi connection. And with each new retelling, the myths stretch a little, morph a little. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes dark, sometimes radical. Feminist retellings give Medusa her voice back. Queer reimaginings explore identity and love through characters like Achilles and Patroclus. People look at these stories and say, what if we told it differently? And mythology says, go for it. Because Greek myths have always been fluid. Even in ancient times, there were multiple versions of each story. Did Helen go willingly to Troy? Or was she kidnapped? Did Odysseus's crew really deserve to be turned into pigs? Or was Circe just misunderstood there was no canon, only storytelling? That's what makes mythology different from, say, math. Math says 2 + 2 = 4. Greek mythology says, okay. So in this version, Zeus turns into a swan. But in another version, he's an eagle. Also, maybe there's a giant snake involved. Either way, someone gets pregnant. It's storytelling without a single truth, and that's its strength. It allows people from any culture, any century, any background to find something in it, to claim a piece of it, to say, this speaks to me. And this reinvention doesn't just happen in books and movies. It happens in classrooms, in conversations, in art, memes, tattoos. People ink Athena's owl on their forearm, name their pets after gods, wear Medusa on earrings. It's subtle, but constant. A whisper of Olympus in your everyday life. Even in politics and philosophy, myth lingers. The idea of Pandora's box, a warning about unintended consequences. The sword of Damocles, a symbol of power and its dangers. The labyrinth, life's complexity. These aren't just metaphors. They're living concepts, born from myth and still shaping how we think. Reinvention also means reclaiming. For a long time, myths were interpreted through a narrow lens, usually male, usually Western. But now scholars, artists, and readers from all walks of life are taking back the stories, telling them with new voices, new perspectives. Medusa is no longer just a monster, she's a survivor. Hecate isn't just a witch, she's a symbol of female power. These retellings don't erase the past, they expand it. And that's what myth was always meant to do. So tonight, if you scroll past a tweet comparing your ex to Narcissus, or see a TikTok where someone's dressed like Hades with eyeliner and sass, you're witnessing mythology in real time. It's not dead, it's just got better lighting and maybe a ring light. These stories have survived volcanic eruptions, wars, plagues, censorship, and centuries of forgetfulness. And they're still here, still being told, reshaped, reimagined. Because they aren't just stories. They're frameworks, blueprints for meaning, containers for human experience. And whether they're painted on vases or projected on screens, they remind us we're not so different from the Greeks. We still ask the same questions, still dream the same dreams, still make the same mistakes. And we still tell the same stories, just in new ways. If all you know about Greek mythology comes from statues in Hollywood, you might think the gods ran the whole show. Bearded men throwing thunderbolts, swinging swords, conquering monsters. But take a closer look. And you'll see that the women mortal, divine, and somewhere in between were not just part of the story. They were the story. From powerful goddesses to tragic queens, Greek mythology is steeped in complex, layered, unforgettable women. They weren't always perfect. They weren't always kind. But they were never boring. And they sure as Olympus weren't secondary. Let's start with Athena, born from Zeus's forehead, yes. Forehead fully armored and holding a spear. That kind of entrance tells you everything. She's the goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and civilization, not to be confused with Ares, who's more about chaos and bloodlust. Athena is calculated, cold, sometimes. She helped Odysseus think his way out of Troy. She turned Medusa into a Gorgon not out of cruelty, but as a form of twisted protection. She wasn't warm, but she was powerful, and people feared her for good reason. Then there's Artemis, goddess of the hunt, protector of wild animals, and proud eternal virgin. She answered to no one. She didn't need love, didn't want marriage, and traveled with a band of fiercely loyal nymphs. Cross her, and you might end up like Actaeon, transformed into a stag and torn apart by your own dogs for accidentally catching a glimpse of her bathing. Harsh, sure, but Artemis didn't ask for your approval. She asked for respect. Aphrodite, on the other hand, played a very different game. She was the goddess of love, desire, and beauty, born from sea foam and instantly iconic. But don't mistake her for just a pretty face. Aphrodite was a master manipulator, the divine CEO of seduction. She could start wars with a glance. Men are gods. Even other goddesses bowed to her power. Love was her domain. But love in Greek mythology was rarely soft. It was fire. It burned, and Aphrodite lit the match. What's fascinating is how these goddesses often represented choices, none of which were simple. Athena's path was intellect and war. Artemis chose nature and solitude. Aphrodite embodied passion and connection. They weren't moral examples. They were archetypes of possibility. But mythology didn't stop at the divine. Mortal women in these stories were just as significant and often more tragic. Medea, a sorceress who gave up everything for Jason, only to be abandoned. Her revenge was nuclear, her pain legendary. She was brilliant, terrifying, and unforgettable. Then there's Penelope, Odysseus's wife. For 20 years, she waits, fends off suitors, keeps the kingdom running, uses trickery and intelligence to survive. She may not have fought a Cyclops, but her endurance is its own kind of heroism. Or Antigone, who defied a king to bury her brother. She knew the law, she knew the cost, and she still chose what was right. Her defiance wasn't loud, but it was final. She died for her beliefs, and in doing so, she became immortal. Even Helen of Troy, often reduced to a face in a war, had more depth than people give her credit for. Some stories suggest she regretted leaving. Others say she was taken. Some claim she never even went to Troy at all, just a phantom, while the real Helen hid in Egypt. Which is the truth? Maybe none. Maybe all. Myth doesn't do binaries. It offers layers, interpretations, possibilities. And then there's Medusa. Oh, Medusa. Once a beautiful mortal, Medusa was transformed into a monster by Athena after being assaulted by Poseidon. Her hair turned to snakes. Her gaze turned people to stone. But was she truly a villain, or a warning, a symbol, a victim today? She's often reclaimed as a figure of rage, justice, and protection. Not a monster, but a mirror reflecting back the violence of a world that feared women who couldn't be controlled. In every corner of Greek mythology, Women appear not just as love interests or side characters, but as forces. They speak truth. They break rules. They suffer. They avenge. They shape fate. And whether you agree with their actions or not, you remember them. Even the fates themselves, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, who spin, measure, and cut the thread of life, all women. Not gods, not kings, women. They held destiny between their fingers. And no one, not Zeus, not Hades, dared question them. This feminine presence was both respected and feared. It was divine and dangerous. Because the Greeks knew something we're still learning today: power doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears a veil, or speaks softly, or bleeds quietly. And that's why these stories still resonate. They don't just show you what a woman should be. They show you what a woman could be, divine or mortal, hero or monster, wise or wild. Mythology says, here are the possibilities. Choose. So tonight, as you close your eyes, think of the women of Olympus and beyond, the ones who waited, the ones who fought, the ones who endured, the ones who shattered everything and walked away from the fire. They weren't side characters. They were the authors of their own legends. It's easy to think of mythology as pure fiction floating in a dream world of gods and monsters, with no map, no coordinates, no compass. But Greek mythology is rooted literally in real places. Mountains you can climb, islands you can visit, seas you can sail across. The myths may be full of flying horses and cursed labyrinths, but their stage, that's Earth. Specifically, the rocky, sun-baked, olive-dotted terrain of ancient Greece. Start with Mount Olympus. Yes, it's a real place. You can hike it. You can stand on the peaks where ancient Greeks believed the gods lived, squabbling and sipping nectar. And when clouds roll over the summit, it's not hard to see why they believed that. The sky looks different from up there, closer, more electric. Olympus wasn't some floating fortress. It was part of the landscape, towering and watchful, divine but accessible. Then there's Delphi, the navel of the world, at least according to the Greeks. Nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, this was the home of the Oracle of Apollo, a real sanctuary, real ruins. People traveled from all over the ancient world to ask the Pythia for cryptic advice. Even today, the wind through the columns feels like it's whispering secrets. You know, if you're into that sort of thing. Troy, once thought to be entirely mythical, turned out to be very real. Archaeologists found it in what is now Turkey, buried beneath layers of history. Maybe Helen really walked those ramparts. Maybe Paris really stood there with a stolen queen. The stories weren't pulled from thin air, they were sown into the soil. And let's not forget Crete, home of King Minos, the Minotaur, and that infamous labyrinth. There's no direct evidence of a literal half-man, half-bull trapped underground, but there is the palace at Knossos, with its winding halls, strange architecture, and bull imagery carved into its stones. It's easy to see how a myth could grow there. A confusing palace becomes a maze. A prince becomes a monster. A story is born. That's the power of myth grounded in place. It makes the fantastical feel possible. You don't have to believe that Pegasus really flew from Mount Helicon, you just have to stand there and feel the wind. The landscape becomes part of the myth. The sea isn't just water. It's where Odysseus wandered for 10 years, cursed by Poseidon, facing whirlpools and sirens. Every island is suspect. Every wave might hide a god. Even Athens itself is myth-soaked. The city was named after Athena, who won it in a contest with Poseidon. He offered a salt spring. She gave the olive tree. The people chose wisdom over war. You can still visit the Erechtheion on the Acropolis, where both their gifts were said to stand. A city's name becomes a story. A civic identity becomes a divine endorsement. And here's the fascinating part: this merging of real and imagined didn't just serve poetic purposes. It had practical ones. Myths mapped the world. Before GPS, people used stories. If you were told, "Don't sail near that island, it's where the sirens live," you didn't ask for proof, you steered clear. Myth was a navigation tool, a safety manual, a psychological map layered over physical terrain. But geography worked the other way too. The land shaped the myth. Greece is full of caves, springs, mountaintops, and coastline. It's fragmented, dramatic, unpredictable. Of course, they imagined gods on high cliffs, nymphs in freshwater springs, and monsters beneath the waves. The land didn't just inspire the myths, it demanded them. And it didn't stop at Greece. As Greek influence spread through trade, conquest, and colonization, so did their stories. New places were folded into old myths. Alexandria in Egypt became associated with Alexander the Great as a near-mythic figure. Rome absorbed Greek gods wholesale and changed their names but kept the temples, the stories, the geography. The myths traveled, but they never lost their connection to the real world. Even today, tourists visit Greece and say, "I feel something here." They stand in an amphitheater and hear echoes, walk through a ruin and imagine sandals slapping stone, swim in a bay and wonder if this is where Odysseus washed ashore. Rational minds say no, but the heart leans in. Because that's the gift Greek mythology gives us: imagined adventure built on real ground. You're not lost in some fictional galaxy. You're here on Earth, but you're seeing the world differently. Rocks aren't just rocks. They're transformed. That cliff is where Sisyphus pushed the stone. That riverbank, maybe Orpheus once sang there. And the truth is, this layering of myth over reality makes the world feel richer, more meaningful. It's why we visit places tied to stories literary or legendary. It's not about believing in monsters. It's about feeling connected to something older, bigger, stranger. So tonight, if you find yourself dreaming of faraway lands, imagine the myths still humming through the stones of ancient Greece. They're not locked in the past. They're underfoot, in the wind, in the olive trees, in the footsteps of travelers who came before you. Eyes wide, hearts open, listening for gods in the hills. Because some adventures aren't just told, they're walked. Before there were therapists, there were myths. Before there were couches and clinical terms and long, uncomfortable silences. There were stories that knew exactly how complicated, contradictory, and terrifying the human mind could be. The ancient Greeks didn't have psychology as we know it, but they understood people deeply, and they embedded that understanding into their mythology, turning thoughts into monsters, desires into curses, and trauma into eternal metaphors. Let's start with Oedipus. Yes, that Oedipus. He's the poster child for psychological complexity. Born under a terrible prophecy, he tries to escape it by fleeing home only to fulfill it unknowingly. He kills his father, marries his mother, and when the truth emerges, he blinds himself in horror. It's not just shocking, it's symbolic. Blinding yourself after seeing too much, that's an allegory for painful knowledge. For what happens when you realize the truth about who you really are and you can't unsee it. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and Sigmund Freud goes, "Hey, I think this myth kind of explains how humans process unconscious desire, and the Oedipus complex is born." Whether you agree with Freud or not, the fact that one ancient story became a foundational psychological theory says a lot about the depth of Greek myth. And that's just the beginning. Narcissus falls in love with his own reflection and wastes away, It's about vanity, sure, but also about obsession, identity, the dangers of self-absorption. He doesn't just love himself, he can't see beyond himself. In modern terms, that's emotional isolation, the kind that looks like confidence, but is actually loneliness in disguise. Echo, cursed to only repeat others, speaks volumes without saying anything original. She represents voicelessness, unreciprocated love, the fear of not being heard. Today, we'd call that codependency or social anxiety. The Greeks just gave her a name and let her voice fade into forests. Persephone is kidnapped by Hades, dragged to the underworld, and eventually becomes queen of it. But depending on the version, she isn't just a victim, she adapts, changes, evolves. Her myth reflects cycles of trauma and recovery, loss and rebirth. 6 months of darkness, 6 months of light. It's depression, it's healing, it's the emotional seasons we all move through. And let's not forget Eros and Psyche. He's the god of love. She's the personification of the soul. When she doubts him and looks at his face without permission, he vanishes. She has to earn him back through trials and suffering. It's literally love and soul, dancing between trust and betrayal, vulnerability and distance. It's not just romantic, it's psychological. Love only survives when the soul grows. Greek mythology is packed with what we now call archetypes. Carl Jung made a career out of identifying them: the hero, the shadow, the anima, the trickster, all of which were already lounging around on Mount Olympus. The Greeks didn't need diagnostic manuals. They just wrote down what they saw in themselves. The labyrinth wasn't just a cool architectural hazard. It was the mind, confusing, twisting, full of hidden fears and forgotten monsters. Theseus had to enter it, face the Minotaur, his shadow, his primal fear, and find his way out with the help of a thread. Therapy. Anyone. Pandora opens the box or jar, depending on translation, and releases all the world's evils. But at the bottom, hope. It's a perfect metaphor for curiosity, consequence, and resilience. Yes, exploring the unknown can unleash chaos, but it can also lead to healing, to clarity, to a hope. Even Heracles, the great strongman of myth, wasn't just muscles and monsters. He was guilt, grief, rage. After murdering his own family in a divinely induced frenzy, he spends the rest of his life performing labors to atone. That's not just a redemption arc, it's a trauma response, an eternal apology, the desire to fix what cannot be undone. Greek myths didn't explain mental health with chemicals and diagnoses. They explained it with gods whispering in your ear, with monsters that mirrored your worst thoughts, with punishments that looked suspiciously like intrusive guilt spirals. You didn't have anxiety. You had Phobos, the god of panic. You didn't feel depressed. You were under the weight of Hades. You weren't processing grief. You were Demeter, wandering the world, searching for a lost daughter. This mythic lens didn't fix people, but it helped them understand themselves. To say, I'm not broken, I'm part of something eternal. My fear, my rage, my shame, they've existed for thousands of years. I'm not alone. And that's what mythology still offers. A way to look inward without judgment, to see your worst feelings as stories with meaning, to imagine your suffering not as weakness, but as part of a narrative arc, one where monsters can be faced, curses can be lifted, even if it takes time. Today, we have therapy, mindfulness apps, brain scans, and those are wonderful. But sometimes, what you need isn't a treatment plan, it's a story, a mirror that says, here's your fear. Here's your guilt. Here's your hope. And Greek mythology holds that mirror better than almost anything else. So tonight, as you lie in the quiet of your own mind, don't be afraid of the thoughts that stir. Don't push them away. Listen. Trace the thread. Walk your own labyrinth. You're not lost. You're just on a mythic journey through yourself. You think you know the story. A hero, a monster, a god watching from the clouds. But what if I told you that the real story might be hiding behind that story, that beneath every hydra and prophecy, there's something stranger and possibly more real lurking in the shadows? Greek mythology has always walked the tightrope between fantasy and truth. It gives us divine epics, yes, but also puzzles. What did the Greeks really believe? Did they think Zeus sat on a literal mountaintop? Did they actually fear Medusa? Or were these stories symbols from the start? Were the gods just metaphors in disguise? That's the myth behind the myth, and it's where things get weird. Take Atlantis, the perfect city, swallowed by the sea. Plato swore it was real, or at least based on something real. Was it an allegory for hubris and imperial overreach? A retelling of a natural disaster? Or was he just making a philosophical point that everyone took a bit too literally for the next 2,000 years? Some think Atlantis was inspired by the volcanic eruption on Santorini, which wiped out a thriving civilization around 1600 BCE. Others believe it never existed at all. But the myth stuck, because something about a glorious world lost beneath the waves speaks to us. It says, be careful. Greatness can vanish. Now let's talk about the gods themselves. Some scholars believe that the Olympians weren't originally gods at all, but ancient kings, queens, and heroes who were mythologized over generations. Zeus as a powerful tribal leader. Athena as a goddess born from an older matriarchal religion. Apollo as a sun-worshipping cult figure slowly rebranded with a lyre and good hair. Over time, history became legend, and legend became myth. The real people, if they ever existed, were lost in the telling, but their echoes remained. Their stories evolved, blending culture, conquest, and creativity. And before long, their names lit up temples like divine credits on a celestial movie screen. The monsters, too, might be hiding deeper truths. Some believe the Cyclops were inspired by fossilized elephant skulls, with large central cavities where the trunk would have been mistaken for a single eye socket. Early Greeks may have found these bones and spun them into legend. You don't need to understand anatomy to tell a good story. You just need wonder. Giants and titans, maybe they were memories of ancient invaders, taller, stronger, unfamiliar. Sirens, warnings about dangerous waters, cloaked in song. Centaurs, possibly the reaction of island people seeing mounted riders for the first time, human and horse fused into one terrifying new creature. Even the underworld might have roots in reality. Natural cave systems, like the ones at Eleusis or Delphi, often housed rituals involving darkness, fire, and strange gases. Visitors claimed visions, trances, divine messages. Today, we might call it hallucinogenic. Back then, it was Hades whispering from below. This blending of myth and mystery creates what scholars call euhemerism, the idea that myths are exaggerated versions of historical events, that every tale of a god once started with a man, and that the stories we tell aren't lies, they're telescopes, aimed at the past, distorted by time, fear, and imagination. But there's another layer too, a more psychological one. What if the myths weren't just explanations for the world, but expressions of the soul? Persephone's descent isn't just about agriculture. It's about emotional descent, grief, depression, loss. The labyrinth isn't just an architectural curiosity. It's the mind, confusing, circular, full of monsters we must face alone. Orpheus looking back, that's not just a tragic romance. It's the eternal human flaw, the need for certainty, even when it destroys what we love. These interpretations don't erase the original myths, they deepen them. They remind us that stories operate on multiple levels: historical, emotional, symbolic. What was once a warning about wandering too far from home becomes a metaphor for adolescence, identity, or mortality. And this is why Greek mythology has lasted so long. Because it doesn't just tell stories, it contains systems, moral systems, cosmological systems, emotional systems. It offers answers that change with the question. A Spartan might hear the story of Achilles and learn about glory. A mother might hear it and grieve. A modern reader might hear it and ask, what does it mean to be proud, to be broken, to be human? And the myths don't mind. They let you take what you need. They whisper, we've been here before. And they mean it. Today, we still look for the myth behind the myth. We search for Atlantis in satellite images. We compare Heracles to real strongmen. We wonder if there's truth behind the Pegasus. Maybe there is. Maybe there isn't. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that these myths feel true, that they light up something inside us that facts alone can't touch. That even if Zeus never ruled from a literal mountaintop, he still lives in thunder, in ego, in the flash of power we see in ourselves. Because the myths were never about the gods. They were always about us. Here's a question you've probably never asked out loud, but maybe whispered in your mind at 2 a.m. Why do we still care? Why are there still statues of Zeus in museums? Why does your niece wear a Camp Half-Blood t-shirt like she's actually fought monsters? Why do movies still open with thunderclaps, glowing eyes, and ancient prophecies? Because Greek mythology, unlike most things from 3000 years ago, refuses to die. Not just because it's beautiful, though it is. Not just because it's weird, though it's that too. But because deep down, these myths know you. They've always known you. They know what it feels like to want too much, to love too hard, to lose someone and not know how to get out of bed. They know how fear tastes, how betrayal burns, how hope flickers like a candle on a windy night. And they don't lecture you. They don't offer easy answers. They just say, here, take this story. Let it carry you for a while. Maybe that's why we still believe in them, not as literal truths, but as emotional ones, spiritual ones, personal ones. Because when you're lost, sometimes a labyrinth makes more sense than a map. Because when you're broken, it helps to know even God's wept. Because when you're in love and it's messy, it's comforting to think of Aphrodite smiling somewhere, whispering, I've seen worse. These myths persist not because we've preserved them in marble and manuscripts, but because we've recreated them, over and over, in new forms. We make memes about Narcissus. We cosplay as Persephone. We write books where Medusa is the hero. We keep telling the stories not to remember the past, but to understand the present. They remind us that life is not tidy, that fate can be cruel, that people, yes, even godlike ones, mess up all the time. But they also remind us that there's meaning to be found in chaos, that struggle can be heroic, that even tragedy can be transformational. And there's another reason, a quieter one: wonder. The Greeks knew how to wonder. They looked at thunder and imagined a god hurling bolts. They saw the stars and traced the stories of Orion and Andromeda into the night sky. They turned every strange sound in the forest into a nymph or satyr or dryad. They made the world enchanted. We don't do that as much anymore. We measure, we define, we dissect. And those things are good, but sometimes, in doing so, we lose the magic. Mythology gives it back. It says, what if the wind is a whisper from the gods? What if your nightmares are ancient stories speaking through dreams? What if you're not just surviving, but walking your own heroic arc? And isn't that what we all want? Deep down, not just to exist, but to feel that we matter, that our struggles are part of something bigger. That's what the Greeks gave us. A permission slip to see ourselves in stories so old. Their authors are dust, but their words still sing. So tonight, as the light fades and the world softens, remember this. You are the hero of your own myth. You will face monsters. You will make mistakes. You will lose, and you will rise. And somewhere in the darkness, a thread of golden story connects you to everyone who's ever felt the same. Odysseus is still sailing. Achilles still fights. Medusa still watches. And you're still listening. Which means the myths, they're still alive. So, here we are, 15 chapters later. You've met gods who couldn't keep their robes on. Heroes who made very questionable choices. Monsters who may or may not have been metaphors for your last breakup. You've walked through temples, through labyrinths, through emotional landslides and philosophical earthquakes. And somehow you're still awake. Or maybe you're drifting. That's okay too. The myths were made for both. But before you go, let's take one last look back. Not at the myths themselves, but at why they matter. Because Greek mythology, for all its magic and madness, is really just a giant mirror. A beautiful, cracked, slightly dramatic mirror reflecting who we are, who we were, and who we want to be. They reflect our flaws. Every time someone flew too high, Icarus, acted out of pride, Niobe, made a deal they couldn't keep, Orpheus, or looked at their own reflection a bit too lovingly, Narcissus, you saw something you recognized. Something human. These aren't cautionary tales wrapped in lecture notes. They're confessions. Here's what we did. They say, here's what happened. Maybe don't do that. Or do, and learn. They don't shame you for being flawed. They expect you to be, the gods certainly were. They show us resilience. Persephone didn't just survive the underworld, she ruled it. Psyche didn't just win back Eros, she earned her own divinity. Even Odysseus, battered by loss, haunted by war, exhausted by gods with attitude problems, kept going. He longed for home, for peace, and through monsters, storms, and divine nonsense he got there. That's the real story, isn't it? Not the war, not the spells, the endurance. The reminder that no matter how strange the road gets, you can walk it. They offer wonder in a world that's forgotten how to wonder. The modern world is great at many things, apps, airports, burrito delivery, but it's not so great at enchantment. We've replaced gods with algorithms, oracles with forecasts, mystery with measurement. But mythology pushes back. It says, what if thunder is more than just weather? What if your dreams mean something? What if you're not just a person, but a story still unfolding? It doesn't ask you to believe. It asks you to imagine. And that's more powerful than belief. Anyway, they give shape to the unshapable. Fear, grief, desire, rage. How do you explain those to a child or to yourself? You say, there's a goddess called Eris who throws golden apples to start fights. Or, there's a man pushing a boulder up a hill forever. That's what guilt feels like. Or, there's a thread that connects every life. And when it's time, the fates cut it. Suddenly, the intangible becomes visible. Feelings get costumes. Emotions get names. And what seemed unknowable becomes, if not manageable, at least speakable. They survive because they grow. The myths don't fossilize. They mutate, they update, they adapt. Once, Medusa was a villain. Now, she's a symbol of rage and resilience. Once, Narcissus was just a warning. Now, he's a conversation about self-worth. Once, Athena was a war goddess. Now, she might be your study playlist. Every generation rewrites the myths because the myths invite it. They're open source, collaborative. Timeless not because they never change, but because they always do. And most of all, they make you feel less alone. Because deep down, we all want the same things the Greeks wanted. To be seen, to be remembered, to matter. When you hear these stories of hubris and heartbreak, bravery and bad decisions, you realize something comforting. None of this is new. Your confusion, your longing, your weird dream about being chased by a lion who is also your high school math teacher, the Greeks had that covered. Okay, maybe not the math part. They built entire systems of stories to say, yes, life is confusing. Yes, it's hard. Yet, sometimes the gods seem to hate you. But here's a hero. Here's a monster. Here's a thread through the dark. So maybe tonight, you're not Odysseus or Achilles or even Heracles. Maybe you're just someone trying to get some sleep while the world spins a little too fast. That's okay. Even heroes need naps. But just know this. The myths are still with you. In the hesitation before a big choice. In the echo of someone's last words. In the storm that shakes your windows and makes you wonder just for a second if someone up there is listening. They don't ask you to worship. They don't ask you to believe. They just say, listen, we've been here before. And suddenly, the night isn't so quiet. The dark isn't so empty. And you just by hearing become part of something ancient, eternal, gloriously strange. You're not just reading stories, you're keeping them alive. So sleep well, storyteller. Tomorrow, the myths will still be here, waiting for you, whispering, always ready to begin again.